This is a paid advertisement for Visit the USA. The USA is home to many incredible experiences, from pulsing cities with avant-garde music and art scenes to Michelin-starred restaurants, barbecue joints and microbreweries. But if you're wondering where to start, the team at Visit the USA has these tips on where to find the best music, food and drink. For connoisseurs of brisket, sausage and ribs, one state rises above all others: Texas. The Lone Star State's oldest barbecue joint, Southside Market and Barbecue, has been serving up richly smoked meats since 1882. Next up, the Texan state capital, Austin, nicknamed the live music capital of the world. Whatever you like to listen to, Austin has a venue for you. Head down to its dive bars or out into the hill country for your choice of R&B, disco, soul or country. Tip 3, Western Kentucky, where bigger is always better when it comes to sizzling smoky pulled pork and whole pork shoulders. Cutting through these bold flavours, Kentucky's also one of the nation's foremost bourbon producers, with a history dating back to the 18th century. And finally, why not head west to California, a state suffused with sunshine, sea air and refined good taste. There's more than 100 grape varieties here in rolling green vineyards, where you can try the world-class wines they create. To plan your American adventure, go to visittheusa.co.uk. It's the week ending Friday the 31st of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Rishi Sunak promising the return of national service if the Conservatives are re-elected, Israel describing its airstrike on a displaced people's camp in Rafah as a tragic mishap, and former tennis world number 1 Rafael Nadal knocked out of the first round of the French Open. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden and the boss man, Holden Frith. Plus we welcome back the book reviews editor of the International Affairs Journal, Mariana Vieira. And Mariana, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
New Guinea, same politics.
Face the vote itself next week. Look, I don't think this has necessarily crippled the response from the Papua New Guinea government, because there are an awful lot of people, particularly at the local level, who are working hard. But it is, of course, a very unhelpful distraction at a very difficult time. And James Marape, the Prime Minister, he made a comment on Friday about the earthquake, on the landslide, but hasn't really seen anything or said anything since then. So some of his opponents are now accusing him of being missing in action.
Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jagett speaking to ABC News Australia on Tuesday. Mariana, what was he talking about?
So he was talking about how the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea is likely to face a no-confidence motion in Parliament this week, and he has not been seen around much. Since over the weekend, a group of 18 of his MPs, including 5 ministers, defected from the Pangu party, which is the party that he represents.
Why did they defect?
So it isn't entirely clear. This is the most interesting part of the story for me. It isn't entirely clear why they defected. The only big thing that happened in the country, obviously last week, was the landslide. The party has faced a bit of backlash around the recovery efforts, because the landslide took place in the Enga province, which is quite remote, and therefore it has been really hard to extract the bodies. No one knows how many people are actually buried, because the last census was 24 years ago.
But we know it's triple figures of people that have been affected by that, right?
For sure. So there's definitely like a ripple effect, and there's different numbers being circulated. I think so far they've recovered close to 700 people that were found dead. A couple that miraculously survived. But so this is the only sort of short-term thing that we can identify. And there are other long-term things going on in the country since the beginning of the year. But the thing that I would highlight the most is that no-confidence motions are actually a quite common feature of the country's politics.
Why is that? Because, a big song and dance is made in the UK if there's going to be a no-confidence vote in the Prime Minister. That's sort of a career-ending possibility.
Yes, this is correct. However, it's not Marape's first rodeo at all. They had a no-confidence motion that took place in February, And this is the first time that which had to do with the riots from January, which we can also talk about a bit later. But there's this trend of no confidence motions. Actually, Marape took office in 2018 following a similar vote on the previous prime minister. And so ever since Marape was elected, they have a grace period of 18 months. So they couldn't have held another parliament session to have a no confidence vote. As soon as they could do this in February, they had one. And then the parliament did not hold a session for the last 3 months. As soon as they held a session, there's already speculation or the parliament speaker talking about the high expectation of another no confidence vote.
Okay. Harriet, Mariana set us up very well there, as is her style, making it seem like we all know about Marape and landslides and riots. But for those who don't, as an opportunity to just put a spotlight on Papua New Guinea, really, what are we missing in general about that nation?
I think what we're missing is how much more important Papua New Guinea has become on the world stage over the past few years, particularly because of where it is, not just what it has. It does have all this incredible diversity and rich in oil, gas, minerals. It's lots of minerals that are needed for the green revolution that we've spoken about before on this podcast, like nickel for batteries. So it does have all this wealth of resource and this wealth of biodiversity. But in terms of where it is, which is very, very close to Australia, and it's very close to the American military base, main military hub in the Pacific in Guam as well. And it has basically become, in the last couple of years, a sort of prize in the contest between America and China to take dominance in that region. So China signed the security pact with the Solomon Islands in 2022. And then ever since then, as kind of a reaction to that, Australia and America and India and the UK as well have all been courting Papua New Guinea with trying to counteract that. So the US signed a defense deal with Papua New Guinea last year, and Australia bilateral security agreement as well. So basically it particularly last year, with this massive flurry of diplomatic visits and courting from all over the world, Papua New Guinea has become the place that, in the Economist's words, the whole world is trying to woo.
But why? Just geography? Just because it's there between roughly Australia and China? Not
just geography. It's actually it's amazingly rich in resources. It's actually I was really interested to read that it's the world's third largest primary rainforest. But it's also the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas, and it cooperates with American and French firms to do that. So although a lot of people listening to this podcast might associate Papua New Guinea with kind of this very, very strong, enduring tribal civilization, over 800 languages spoken, and very underdeveloped nation associated in the past with cannibalism and that kind of thing. What I think people are missing now is just how significant it's becoming on the world stage in terms of kind of the West versus China in the Indo-Pacific region.
I mean, Holden, is there an extent to which, therefore, either the US or China or Australia might be wanting to prop up Marape?
There certainly is. And in fact, it seems that there's almost a competition between Australia in particular and China to offer more support. And it's support that I think Papua New Guinea feels in both cases comes with a certain amount of strings attached. Mariana mentioned the rioting at the beginning of this year, and it was quite a serious breakout of disorder in which 16 people died. A lot of businesses and property in the capital, Port Moresby, was destroyed. But one of the characteristics of that violence that got noticed was that Chinese-owned property, which had Chinese-provided security guards, emerged from it relatively unscathed. And after that outbreak, China offered the Papua New Guinean government more support, more surveillance equipment, more Chinese training for Papua New Guinean police and security forces. And that led to a strong reaction from Australia, who said that China should play no part in the training of security forces in the Pacific Island. There were then questions about whether Australia might be willing to step in and offer support in the form of federal police officers to Papua New Guinea. It has preferred to offer support in the form of money and trade deals. But there is clearly anxiety about China getting a toehold in this country that is very close to Australia, but also has one of the few armed forces in the Pacific region. Most of the sort of small Pacific states don't actually have any significant army or navy.
And so what does all this kind of international football with the country, Mariana, mean for the people who actually live there? I mean, who's representing what they want?
I think it's a really interesting point, because there's a way in which these domestic issues become sources or opportunities for external interference. And so I was reading a little bit more about what kind of priorities the domestic population has at the moment. There's this huge nationwide shortage of fuel after the main provider was dropped because of corruption charges. And so a lot of the analysis was looking at how there's a lot of political uncertainty because of the grace period being over. And the way that in which the government will be able to hold on to power has to do with how they deal with these domestic issues. And so lots of people were talking about how climate change is actually a much bigger priority for the country, the landslide being associated with the deforestation, as Harriet was talking about.
Yeah, for mining, right? So that's part
yes,
of it.
for mining and logging. And so some of these trees and their immensely long roots are some of the things that keep the forest together. And of course, the country is ranked as the 16th most at-risk country to climate change and natural hazards, according to the 2022 World Risk Index. And so there's all of this interest in the resources that Harry was talking about makes the local populations quite vulnerable in a way, and not just to domestic priorities, but again to this preying from international players. And especially with the deal that we were talking about on the Solomon Islands is really relevant, because China finally persuaded the Solomon Islands to sign it after there were issues with the different riots and the police forces. And so the events from January this year in Papua New Guinea sort of make everyone a little bit more on edge. And the fact that the government sort of turned down Chinese help has a lot to do with, of course, Australia's willingness to be a key development partner.
But is there a serious opposition, is my point? Like, is there anyone out there who's going to take on Marape?
So this is the thing. One of the ministers that turned over the weekend was the former finance minister, and he's now heading the opposition party. So you don't necessarily need one strong opposition party. You need enough people to cross the threshold majority in the parliament so that the no confidence motion goes through. And so it seems to be less of a one strong man type of politics in Papua New Guinea, which is quite interesting in the trends that we see in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Mariana, this is a facile point, but we talk about how this might impact the rest of us. As I learn about Papua New Guinea, I'm finding it quite a fascinating place to learn about, and it occurs to me that it's never once been mentioned by anyone I know as a place to visit as a tourist. Is it a safe place to visit? Should we be going to Papua New Guinea?
I do not have the answer to that, unfortunately.
I can give you one nugget of information, and that's that I lived in Papua New Guinea for 2 years from the age of 4. So I can
look at him showing his cards in the last minute of this conversation.
I wondered when that was coming out.
Did you hoard a lot of minerals, and are you going to sell them off?
I didn't. I think perhaps I should have done, but no. I mean, I lived in the capital, Port Moresby, but we did venture up into the highlands a couple of times. It's a very inaccessible area. You can only get up in a small propeller plane. There are no roads. I do have vivid memories of it being very beautiful, but it is, I think, also a relatively risky place to visit for tourists. It tends to appear on those sort of, wild frontiers type tours rather than as somewhere you would go independently. But yeah, it is on the tourist map if at the wilder reaches of it.
It's a high kidnapping risk, though, no? I mean, one of the main ways that it comes into the news is seeing these incredibly sort of devastating but also fascinating stories about people who are kidnapped by Papua New Guinean tribes, and some of the photos that can come out of that the photos that the tribes themselves can have released or share, it's just amazing. It's kind of like it's just the most unimaginably different types of civilizations, but yeah, I wouldn't necessarily put it at the top of my travel bucket list this year.
I mean, Mariana, politically, what do you think is going to happen next as a result of this? You've chosen it as your story of the week, but is it a significant week in Papua New Guinean politics or not?
I think it is significant in the sense that it becomes the cyclical event in Papua New Guinean politics. As Harriet was saying, the country is increasingly more on everyone's radars, political radars, that is. So my radars, the radars around me. I have this feeling that the vote of no confidence will go through. If it goes through, it will just be politics as normal, as I was trying to allude to. But there are all these issues that just remain untouched. And I think it's important to bring awareness to the fact that political change doesn't necessarily reflect a better economy, a better police force. It just sort of becomes this way in which the country comes on the stories, on the headlines in Australia and China, and then almost seems like an opportunity to pounce. So I wouldn't be surprised if China was now suddenly offering some more help, saying, hey, every time you're in trouble, we're here. Don't forget that we're here. Australia might not be cutting it for you. Let us know.
Okay. Harriet, you're up next after this. This is a paid advertisement for Visit the USA. The USA is home to many incredible experiences, from pulsing cities with avant-garde music and art scenes to Michelin-starred restaurants, barbecue joints and microbreweries. But if you're wondering where to start, the team at Visit the USA has these tips on where to find the best music, food and drink. For connoisseurs of brisket, sausage and ribs, one state rises above all others, Texas. The Lone Star State's oldest barbecue joint, Southside Market and Barbecue, has been serving up richly smoked meats since 1882. Next up, the Texan state capital, Austin, nicknamed the live music capital of the world. Whatever you like to listen to, Austin has a venue for you. Head down to its dive bars or out into the hill country for your choice of R&B, disco, soul or country. Tip 3, Western Kentucky, where bigger is always better when it comes to sizzling smoky pulled pork and whole pork shoulders. Cutting through these bold flavours, Kentucky's also one of the nation's foremost bourbon producers, with a history dating back to the 18th century. And finally, why not head west to California, a state suffused with sunshine, sea air and refined good taste. There's more than 100 grape varieties here in rolling green vineyards, where you can try the world-class wines they create. To plan your American adventure, go to visittheusa.co.uk. Okay, Harriet, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is the Ministry of Defence actually toxic?
I remember the first time I went solo, and it was sitting side by side as you were being instructed. The instructor got out and said, right, off you go, do a circuit on your own. And you did exactly what you'd just been shown. Only this time, when you looked out, you were on your own.
Return to War. British trained troops head back to the Ukrainian front lines, a 3-part documentary series on the MOD's YouTube channel. Harriet, that is something that the Ministry of Defence would like us to watch, no doubt. But your story this week is probably something they'd rather we didn't pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week, the Times revealed that at least 40 former and serving RAF pilots are actually suing the MOD. Dozens of them are dying of these very aggressive cancers, a lot younger than they should be. And allegedly, this is from the toxic exhaust fumes that the British military helicopters have been pumping out over the past decades. So the claim is that the government knew that these service personnel were being exposed to this toxic exhaust fumes for more than a decade, but did nothing about it and didn't tell them. And the widow of one of the pilots who actually died last year has compared this to the post office scandal and the infected blood scandal as well.
Because there's this sense of not just incompetence, if you can use that word in such tragic circumstances, but also potentially an institutional cover-up.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the link, because it seems as though the MOD, the UK government, was aware of these risks. This is what the lawyers have said, and they've cited documents that can back this up, said that the MOD and the government have been aware of the risk since 1999, but they didn't do anything about it. They didn't provide the personnel with any kind of protective equipment. They didn't modify the aircraft, and it only was taken out of service, the Sea King helicopter, which is not the only helicopter implicated in this scandal, but this particular one was only taken out of service in 2018. So the idea that not only the MOD knew about this, but that it delayed and delayed and delayed for years, taking this helicopter out of service, allegedly due to budget cuts, that is incredibly significant. And this, as the lawyers said, these 40 that are suing the MOD, it could be the tip of the iceberg, because thousands and thousands of personnel have spent time in these helicopters over years, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, just to make this a domestic political story, and it isn't, Holden, but just since we're in this election period at the moment, from the perspective of the Conservatives, it wouldn't be great if this story did get a lot of traction, would it? Because why were there budget cuts? We know what George Osborne came in saying in 2010. And, you know, you could argue, if all of these allegations are true, that there's a clear link between that and the death of these servicemen.
Yeah, and I think it certainly seems that money was a factor here. And I think, you know, in two ways, really. One, simply the cost of making the modifications that would have been needed to make these aircraft safe. And that's something that other militaries did do. Germany modified the exhaust on the helicopters so that the fumes wouldn't get into the cockpit. But I think the other way in which that had an effect was that there was the intention to retire and replace a lot of the affected helicopters. And so I think possibly there was a, you know, either explicit or implicit calculation that it wasn't worth spending the money on a piece of equipment that was going to come out of service in a year or two. But because of the budget cuts, that retirement date kept being put back a year or a couple of years at a time. And so actually it ended up being more than a decade between the discovery of this fault and eventually some of the helicopters going out of service.
I mean, how do you think this story might play internationally, Mariana? Because in the UK, we often hear from people that are in the military saying, we're not being given the equipment, you know, there aren't enough of us, there isn't enough money. But internationally, the British Army still does have a reputation, doesn't it, as having some good equipment, as having standards and ethics, as training other armies. What do you think this might do to that reputation?
I think it's definitely a blow to their reputation, right? But I think it comes in the context of how occupied Britain has been with Brexit and just sort of pulling back from that idea of like a global Britain with an expanded reach across the world. So I'm not surprised, or I don't think people will be surprised that this unfortunate series of events seems to be justified as part of cost cutting, or the reason that this wasn't addressed was to do with finances. I do wonder if it has a ripple effect on its allies. I do wonder if NATO will sort of have, in a way, an extended mistrust of whether the UK can actually contribute with the required numbers as part of its membership. But I'm not necessarily sure that it will have much more of an international impact. I mean, even domestically, I see that it hit the headlines, some of them, but if we are covering it here, then it does mean that it has gone under the radar. Yes.
And there's an unfortunate international comparison, isn't there, Harriet, which Holden alluded to there. You know, he said other militaries did different things. Germany, and we're talking of our allies, Germany had the same helicopters and took action, and Britain didn't.
Yeah, that's, I think, what is really incredibly damning about this story. And it's also, it seems as though the US had known or suspected about the dangers that carcinogens were in these jet efflux gases, that they contained benzene carcinogens, that they had known about this maybe as far back as the 1960s and 70s. So that's two major allies of the UK that either knew, suspected, or knew for sure and took action. And that creates an enormous problem of trust between the MOD and its personnel, because if you cannot trust that these organizations that are going to take action to keep you safe, or at least inform you that there might be a risk, they also haven't informed any of the personnel. And the lawyers have alleged that some of them wrote to the MOD years ago asking for blood tests on those that have flown these types of aircrafts to see if they would or already had developed a certain type of cancer. They didn't get a reply, the lawyers say. So that is a massive breakdown in trust between military personnel and the organization, that the understanding is that they will keep them safe, and in turn they will risk their lives to keep the nation safe. I mean, where do we go from here? And this is just one of 4 major scandals that have hit the MOD this year alone, which we can talk about a bit more. But I think what is really important to get across here is just how aggressive and horrific these cancers are. We're talking about rare forms of blood cancer, bone cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, testicular cancer. The widow who I mentioned earlier, her husband was diagnosed and died just like 3 weeks later. He was only 42. And the other thing is that the royal family could be brought into this as well, because it's Prince William's former flying instructor, Zach Stubbins, who was told that he had 10 years to live when he was diagnosed with cancer. And he was only 33 when he was diagnosed. So I think the story is going to get a lot more traction in the weeks to come, potentially as more people join this lawsuit. But I do think that we should talk about just how many scandals the MOD has suffered in just the last few months.
Well, go on. I can tell you're jumping at the bit for that. So just give us a brief overview. What else are they suffering?
Well, actually, it's funny that the widow linked it to the post office scandal, because in January, the MOD was actually found to have had contracts with the software company behind the scandal, Fujitsu, security contracts that the MOD didn't reveal details of, and that there could be security implications of that if there's the same problems as there was with Horizon. And then in March, it came out that the MOD had paid millions into a Saudi bank account out of its own bank account during one of the biggest corruption scandals in history, even though there was this ongoing inquiry into the arms deal with Saudi Arabia. And then in April, there was a former MOD official jailed for taking £70,000 in secret bribes and gifts. And then just a couple of weeks ago, there was this massive Chinese cyber attack targeting MOD personnel. So in the context that we're in at the moment, this most dangerous geopolitical and security defense context that we've been in since the Cold War, what does it mean if we can't trust the MOD?
Yeah, well, I suppose the broader narrative, Holden, and we mentioned the post office scandal, the infected blood inquiry, the broader thing is, do people trust the British authorities to do the right thing, the moral thing, the ethical thing, when they realise there's been a balls up? Because mistakes happen. That's different, isn't it, to then covering it up and not admitting it?
Yeah, and I think that can have a corrosive effect in lots of different areas. But one of the areas in which that sort of trust between the state and the individual is most acute is in the armed forces. And there's the idea of the military covenant, which is the belief that in return for putting their lives on the line to defend the nation, soldiers should receive the care and the protection of the state. And I think that it's almost because I think you could have a sort of glib response to this that says, well, soldiers sign up to put their lives at risk. They
could have died at 20, they could have died 25, so what difference 42? I suppose that's what some people might
and perhaps
think.
the risk of, fumes in a helicopter seem less alarming than the risk of a bullet on a battlefield. But I think
those people are obviously wrong. We're trying to be balanced on this.
Those people are clearly wrong.
If you're about to sacrifice your life for the state, you need to know that they're doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, don't you?
And I think it's actually almost the fact that soldiers are expected to take extreme risk when there is no alternative, that heightens the anger that they've been exposing themselves to this unnecessary risk, and a risk they were told nothing about. And whereas, I think soldiers probably are much more conscious about risk and mortality than those of us who, make podcasts for a living, that they can perhaps make sense of death on a battlefield, even if, that might come with all sorts of political complications and, kind of personal questioning. But death by cancer from a helicopter exhaust fault is something that you can't really make sense of and can't really attach a meaning to in that way.
And it's a slow, horrible death as well. I mean, we shouldn't gloss over the fact that this is a very different proposition than taking a bullet or going down in service to your country. We're talking about some of these cancers. I mean, people can be living with them for 10, 12 years, suffering horribly, not just with the cancers, but with the treatments as well. It's a very different proposition, and it's not something anyone signed up for.
What consequences should there be for those that allowed this to happen, though, Mariana?
I'm honoured that you think I should decide what sort of punishment there should be.
Judge Mariana in our new spin-off
I don't
format.
know. I felt so frustrated reading about the story and the other scandals, most of them having to do with how much money has been mishandled, and then saying that these helicopters couldn't be phased out because of cost cutting. I was just getting increasingly outraged, and I was just thinking, in terms of justice, there's nothing you can sort of do for the people who've already died, the ones that are already terminally ill. There's maybe an idea of intergenerational justice where we see that the MOD has some sort of institutional reform or change to ensure that these things don't happen in the future. But I don't see, like, following these headlines, I don't see a response from the MOD that sort of inspires that. I'm not sure what sort of, this was one of my questions actually, what sort of compensation the people in the case, the 40 servicemen, were looking for. But I remember reading something briefly about if you sort of have an issue with what's going on. And the fact that the MOD just had the statement that pointed people towards this armed forces compensation scheme, which is about £70 a week, I don't think this is enough. So although I don't know what the exact answer is, I feel like what is being done currently is really not enough. And the fact that so many cases have to be brought up to actually uncover the scandals. This shouldn't be on civil society to try and seek justice just on their own and have to pay for the cost of going to court and so on. There should be some more institutional responsibility and accountability that we're just simply not seeing. And the more that these cases come out, even with the one around Saudi Arabia, how Tony Blair actually suppressed the investigation in 2006, that just adds to that to the erosion of trust and that contract between we're sort of voting you in, trusting you to deal with our defense, and then this is the result.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can trust in me 100% when I say Holden is up next after this. Holden, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is it time to meet the new old lad?
Get ready to witness the rebirth of a 90s icon.
We're going to have loads of exciting features as we attempt to relive our youth. Relive our youth? We're not that old, are we?
Are you able to get out of a chair without saying, right?
No, that's fair enough. We'll have laughs. We'll have big eats. We'll have life hacks. And we'll have exclusive interviews with some of the world's biggest stars.
The Return of an Icon, a video released earlier this week. Holden, which 90s icon is being relaunched?
This is the resurrection of Loaded, the pioneer of the Lad mags, which sold nearly 500,000 copies a month in the late 1990s, then withered in the 2000s and finally died surprisingly late, I thought, in 2015.
Yes, but that was as an online proposition, though, wasn't it? It hasn't been gracing our shelves for some time.
No, it sort of dwindled away to nothing, and then has for 9 years has been entirely absent. But then relaunched this week with a 30th anniversary print special.
Oh, so they're not relaunching the glossy magazine? That's just a one-off, is it?
It is, yes. And in fact, that has not been entirely obvious from the publicity and some of the reaction. I had sort of initially thought it was coming back as a sort of monthly print magazine. But no, it's a print special. And then a digital magazine called Loaded World, which is for subscribers only and promises discounts, deals and competitions, as well as the sort of editorial content that you would have expected from Loaded magazine.
A digital magazine for subscribers only. If only we had the editor of one of those for their opinion. What do you make of their pricing strategy, Holden? Because was it £9 a month?
£9
That seems
a
a
month.
lot for this particular content.
It does. You know, I think it is telling that most of the reaction has focused on the print special and has reacted to it as if it was going to be a magazine, because I think it's so much easier to build an identity and a sense of belonging around a magazine that exists on paper, and it has a cover and it has a sort of beginning and a middle and end and a sense of being consumed as a package. Whereas, you know, there have been many attempts, most of which have failed, to resurrect something of that sort of cultural significance in an online form, and, you know, specifically for men and maybe specifically for young men. But this is going to be, I think, a challenge to make this work.
Well, what's interesting, Harriet, and was obvious to us watching the video there, but may not have been as obvious listening to it, is that this is actually aimed at the same cohort of people that read Loaded 20 years ago. It's not aimed at 20-year-old men now, it's aimed at 40-year-old men now.
Yeah, no, so the new editor is saying that they're targeting the original audience who are now, quote, living happily at home with their wife and kids, but still reminiscing about nights spent clubbing until 3 a.m. drinking £1 shots with a bedroom covered in posters of half-naked women. But the whole point...
Mariana literally has her head in her hands. I just feel I should come to you, Mariana, briefly.
That is a direct quote from the new editor.
Why, Mariana, are you shaking your head at this notion?
I thought we were past having posters of half-naked women in their rooms, and if men did have these posters in their rooms, I don't think this is the main thing that they were advertising. So I don't think this is necessarily the unique selling point. Also because it's not print. Everything this and the new editor-in-chief, who is also a woman, seems to be stuck on this. I don't know. I'm going to go on a rant. I'll wait.
No,
I'll
give
wait.
us the rant. I could see it coming. Give it to us. I'll come back to Harriet. She can wait.
So she says that the goal is to bring back all those things that the 35 to 55-year-old men are being cheated out of by society. What are these things? I'm not the target audience. What are these things?
She says they're being cheated out by society. This is a direct quote again. She says they're being cheated out of the chance to ogle beautiful women like Liz Hurley or Pamela Anderson. Now, in preparation for this story, I decided to go on Instagram to look at Liz Hurley's Instagram, and I can tell you that I was absolutely not cheated out of the opportunity to ogle Liz Hurley in a swimsuit. And I think that is it's when with just going back to your question about why it's targeting the original audience, which is now 35 to 55-year-olds. What it seems as though these guys are missing, in her mind, in the editor Danny Levy's mind, is their youth. They're missing going out clubbing till 3 a.m, drinking shots, bedroom covered in posts of half-naked women. Very typically, this is just, we can see this in the context of just more millennial bait, internal infantilization of a generation.
But then it's a niche, isn't it? If you can see it in a context, then that's an audience to market to.
But what they're missing is their youth that cannot be provided by an online platform. Now, I think, as far as I understand, I mean, the original magazine was multi-award winning for great writing, great design, travel, humor, fashion features, that kind of thing, as well as, a half-naked women.
I'm glad you said that, because people misremember, I think, Loaded as Pamela Anderson on the cover and Jordan in the hand bra, and all of that was going on, but there was, they put Kathy Burke on the cover, they put footballers on the cover.
It only had, in the first 3 years, there were only 10 covers with women on them, right, and only 2 in swimwear, so it's not...
And it was funny and clever.
It was very funny, very self-deprecating. The original strapline was actually for men who should know better, which is very self-aware. The new strapline is for men who know better, which it calls to mind a different kind of, not just a different kind of audience, but a different product. And there is no mention of any great editorial writing or offering in this new product.
Well, of course not. That costs money, doesn't it?
I don't know if you've been on their Instagram. So I had a look at the new Loaded magazine Instagram. It has only 500 followers since the 2nd of May, which is absolutely abysmal. I cannot tell you how fast that I could get 3 times that with a picture of my cat. And, if you look at their story, it's like just discount, and it looks so amateur. It's awful. I mean, if what they're targeting is nostalgia and a longing for youth and bygone times, what they're offering is not matching that. It's not matching what they have identified as the need. And I think the idea that you might miss the era of posters of half-naked women on your bedroom walls. Why on earth would someone pay to see half-naked women in a magazine when they can see it for free, ad nauseum, from the safety and comfort and privacy of their own phone with the internet?
Yes, but there is a curational value, isn't there, Holden, in these digital brands doing these things for you. And I suppose what the editor's located is that, yes, pornography is available on tap, but that's not what they're selling. They're selling clever commentary and, I suppose, glamour shots. I mean, what you might have called soft porn, but not really. I mean, just, suggestive shots of women mixed with other editorial things. Now, you might have a view about whether or not that's something you want to be involved in creating, but she thinks there's a niche for it, and that niche is not being served anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I thought was interesting about this was what exactly is the shape of that niche? Like, what would a good version of Loaded look like now, and what does that mean about how men think about themselves? Because I think what's really clear from, I read a good chunk of the new version of Loaded, and I compared the new interview with Liz Hurley with the original one from the first magazine. And
you've been doing some hard work this week.
I thought it might be available on the newsstand, so I spent a good half hour trawling newsagents around Paddington last night, and then realised it was subscribers only. But no, I mean, the thing that was really obvious was that the new version of Loaded is it's really a magazine about Loaded. It's telling you about how it's trying to recreate something that in the original felt very natural and spontaneous and had a strong sense of being written by somebody who might be part of the audience. And it had that kind of, it had enough knowingness, but without feeling like it was entirely self-referential. Whereas the new one is sort of, it has this odd combination of being very self-conscious, but also not being that distinctive compared with other interviews of Liz Hurley that you might find. In fact, I found one in Hello magazine, branching out my media studies research last night, and really she covered exactly the same topics in both of those interviews, and you could have swapped the two around, and neither would have felt entirely out of place. And you definitely couldn't have said that about the 1994 version of Loaded.
Although, Mariana, is there something quite sweet about Liz Hurley being the cover star? I mean, she is in her 50s. I mean, she is a very glamorous woman, but, you know, the original Loaded, when they did feature a cover star, it would be a young woman.
Well, I suppose that's the only highlight of this, is that if the magazine is looking to occupy this middle ground and say it's okay to appreciate beautiful women, they essentially take it upon themselves to define who gets to be a beautiful woman. So if now suddenly 20 years later we accept women that are above their after their 40s to be beautiful women, then I'm really glad. I don't know if they're...
I mean, it'd be quite radical, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but are they bringing back women who were beautiful or considered beautiful when they were in their 20s or 30s, like the nostalgia feeling that Holden was talking about? Or will they bring in new women? And this almost feels like having a woman as the editor-in-chief who's saying these things, that it's okay to give men permission to ogle over beautiful women. It's sort of like blurring the line between appreciating women, which is what she says, and objectifying, sexualizing, or commodifying their bodies. And there's so many other places like Instagram pages where you can see this for free. And also much more diversity where there isn't someone curating this content. So it just feels a bit like, are they bringing this back to give this specific audience permission, or to say that all these things that women have been fighting about, all the insecurity issues that women have from having looked at these magazine covers for decades on end, are actually not really a problem.
It's an interesting phenomenon, this as well, Harriet, isn't it? This idea of buying a media brand that millions of people recognise long after the original asset has been stripped. You know, so that the owners can sell just the brand. They don't have to sell any journalists or buildings or pesky things like that. They just sell the brand, and then you're starting from a point where more people understand what it is you're trying to do. Is that a path to some success for some media brands?
I mean, it could well be. I don't think it will be in this case. So we can talk about where that has that kind of riding on the nostalgia and having like a reboot of an older franchise has been very successful. For example, the Face magazine, which is very successful, but that relaunch is not successful because of the magazine. I mean, it's successful because it launched its own talent agency last year. It has an in-house TikTok talent agency. It dabbles in e-commerce. It dabbles in audio. It's not primarily successful. We all know the challenges facing magazines in the publishing industry. So in this case, though, I think you can see it as a very cynical, deeply cynical sort of PR stunt / nostalgia bait, because I do not believe for 1 second that any men ever lost the right to ogle women. I mean, that has never happened. That is an absolute nonsense. Oh, woke gone mad, can't say nothing no more, PC run riot, whatever. That is absolutely not true in reality. And I think any woman can tell you that isn't true.
I suppose as well, Holden, it's just not such a cool brand, is it? That's the thing. I mean, compared to the Face, that's a really interesting example, isn't it? Because the Face always was woke, for want of a better phrase, right? The Face was bisexual, models, fashion, trends, cutting edge photography. That stuff's still cool. Whereas the stuff that Loaded did was, you know, Noel Gallagher and 90s stuff, Frank Skinner. That's not cool now.
No, it's almost a mark of its success then is that it feels so much of its age that it now feels like pastiche and something that we've maybe moved on from and matured. But I do think there is a bit of a gap here, and I think that, you know, the editor's comments feel a little bit clumsy, and maybe they were intended to create PR, and maybe they were just a bit misplaced or sort of accidentally came out in a kind of clunky way. But I do think that I think it is difficult to define and express masculinity in a positive way. And I think that what Loaded was doing then was expressing a particular form of masculinity in a very clear and confident way. And I think that is harder to do now. And maybe that there are definitely positives to the fact that masculinity has sort of developed in a lot of different ways, and it's sort of easier to express that in the way you've been talking about through sort of style or music or even food, thinking about kind of the way James Acaster and Ed Gamble relate to each other on Off Menu. I think that's a very interesting and different form of kind of male friendship that definitely wouldn't, the way they talk about their friendship and the way they relate to each other, you just wouldn't have got that sort of sense of two straight men in the 1990s. But I think the trying to create a general lifestyle magazine now is really difficult because of the way the internet has stripped all of the sort of parts of it apart. So if you want to go for fashion, you go to one place. If you want to go to music, you go to another place. If you want to look at naked women, there's plenty of those, but you're not going to find all of that together in a way that feels like it stands for something as an identity. It's much more fragmented, and that lends itself to becoming more extreme and sort of less culturally central.
On which note, we end this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Harriet, Holden and Mariana. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription when you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.